Hi chess friends, this is King's Executor covering my choice as the game of the day from this round 2 of the Candidates Tournament in 2003. First of all, I invite you to subscribe to this channel to learn very interesting and exciting openings and learn the ideas of it. And this is my choice today because this is part of this channel's openings repertoire. This is Timur Radjabov against Vasily Ivanchuk, and as a response to d4, Ivanchuk chose to try to get into that Leningrad Dutch formation via an interesting move order. Of course, if he plays the normal f5 here immediately, he might run into the anti-Dutch lines, for example the Staunton gambit here. And to avoid this, many grandmasters try to get into that interesting Dutch Leningrad formation without running risk to face that gambit. So knight c3 here, and we quickly develop or see the Leningrad formation develop here. And my recommendation here is in this position c6 for black, which Ivanchuk chose. c6 does a couple of things. First of all, black's plan is to play queen e8 and pawn to e5, and then it's very good to have the d5 square under control, so there are no checks for white on this square and no pieces entering the center from the white camp. This bishop is blocked for the next couple of moves, or for the next maybe 30 moves, and this is a very helpful move. The knight can develop to the c7 square, and black's position is very flexible. He can play queen e8 and even knight here, and then rook here, and then finally b5 if e5 is not as promising. It depends what rises. Okay. In this position, this is the mainline position. White chose the anti-Dutch Leningrad position for him, and rook b1 is one of the main lines. Rook b1 steps out of any future tactics here in combination with knight e4, and then a very soft diagonal against the rook here. So this is why this rook is stepping aside, and of course white is planning b4, b5 to make c6 a soft spot and activate the bishop here again. There are different moves here. Black can, for example, play a5 and try to dissuade white from playing b4 immediately. Afterwards he can play knight a6 to increase control of b4. Knight e4 is probably the main move in this position, trying to keep the game focused in the center here, and well, if it turns good for black, rook b1 might look like a waste of time. So this is black's idea. Taking that knight is not a very good deal for white, because black can block the central light diagonal here, light square diagonal, and I don't think that there is very much for white. So in this position Radjabov chose queen c2, the main move, and Ivanchuk took that knight. Now here are two possibilities for white. One is queen takes c3, and then you see that bishop and the queen are lined up on the same diagonal, so e5 is good. And if takes, white can block that dark square diagonal, and taking for white, taking on e4 for black is not a good deal. You're activating this bishop then. So f4 is the move in such a position. Let's drop back to this position. Well, white cannot take this pawn because of the simple exploitation of that pinned knight. You see that bishop is doing a very nice job, and black is winning back his pawn with a better pawn formation and pawn structure. So back to this position. Radjabov chose the interesting pawn takes c3 instead of queen takes, and now these pawns look kind of funny, and this is what Ivanchuk tried to make use of. e5, and black is threatening e4 in this position. Radjabov took the pawn, and bishop a3. This is a very common move for white in this line, simply cutting the board into a half. And making, of course, black's life very difficult. If rook e8 in this position, I think then e4 is thematic, blocking in that bishop, by blocking that pawn, and again taking here doesn't look very good for black. White can gain a tempo, and black is lacking very promising moves here. You see white's position is activating more and more. The rook keeps that bishop at home. This bishop is being activated, and the pawn is a goner. If e3 here, then pawn takes, and now you see the rook can come back here, and there could be enhanced control of f8. It looks just uncomfortable. So rook e8 doesn't look a very good deal for black. This is why Ivanchuk chose rook f7. White took his free move, and queen e8. You see the queen cannot move here, queen cannot move here, and I think on queen c7, simply bishop here. So queen e8 and e4. This is a very good play by Radjabov, but black is not worse so far. f4, the thematic push. Well, in the Dutch-Leningrad you probably try to play an accelerated King's Indian. You want to push your kingside pawns to mate white. Rook d3 simply. And in this position I think Ivanchuk starts to to lose control of his plan. See, the Dutch-Leningrad is an opening where you can easily misplay if you don't understand its philosophy. It's a very interesting and kind of a stubborn plan for black. You want to mate white, but if white plays solidly and good, like in this position, then there is not much of a hope for black. I think in this position bishop f8 to neutralize white's very good bishop for black's worst bishop, because, well, it just stared at this pawn, is a very good idea. And now white cannot do much, so this would be burning out in a draw. If rook to d1 to threaten rook d8, maybe winning the queen in some tactical opportunities, simply knight d7 to cut that out, and the bishop on a3 is still en prise. Well, if you take the bishop in this position, of course, you would lose the queen for it. So knight d7 and everything is fine for black. Let's drop back to this position. Radjabov took on g3 and I don't like this. I don't like this because it's against the principle of chess to keep the tension between pawns, to maximize your possibilities in the future. By releasing tension, well, it's not losing for black immediately, but it makes things worse. Knight a6 by Ivanchuk here in this position. I think bishop f8 still is the move to go for black, because that white bishop is very strong, and knight a6 just helps to increase black's position, because that knight is not immediately putting pressure to white. Knight g5 gaining a tempo on the rook, and rook c7, bishop d6. Now you see black got into big trouble, and all because he didn't accept that white played the opening good, and there is no attacking hopes for black. Bishop f6 was Ivanchuk's move. So before we go on, let's go back to this position. It's very interesting that instead of rook c7 or another rook move on the second of the 7th rank, that rook f8 is the suggestion of the engines. And why is that? I think this to find that move, or to decide to make that move, is very difficult over the board. If white took that rook, black, funnily enough, has a lot of compensation for this missing exchange. If queen d2 to threaten rook d8, winning the queen, you see that the bishop cannot move from c8 to activate the rook guarding d8, because simply that rook is keeping that bishop at home still. So bishop f6 in this position to cover the square. And if knight back, then knight c5. Rook e3, bishop g4, with the idea of taking off that knight, so the bishop can move to g5 and win the exchange back. So in this lines, after exchanging the rook on f8, the exchange to be precise, black is compensated. The bishop pair compensates him, the activity of his pieces compensate him, the lack of room and space for white compensates black here. Very interesting. And if queen e1 to get out of any pin, then simply black can build his position up attack the doubled pawns, and you see this position looks very comfortable for black indeed. The b7 pawn is protected by the knight. b6 can be played as well soon, and there's no breakthrough for white. If f4, well, that loses a pawn for white. How to defend that pawn? If rook here, then well, what can we play? Well, there are different moves, but I don't think that these pawns are strong. They are kinda hanging pawns. Okay, so let's drop back to knight g5, attacking the rook, and of course it's not easy to find rook f8 being a satisfactory move. Rook c7, and that gives white a very strong advantage here. Queen d2. Of course, the threat is simply the hidden threat is rook d8. After the trick, bishop takes pawn, deflecting that bishop from control of d8 here. So rook d7 is answered by bishop h3. And now after rook g7, white gets to play his idea, and this is very strong. The bishop was taken and rook d8. Bishop h3 was taken, and well, black is in a very bad shape. You see the rook is doing nothing. f4 seems to be very strong in this position, shutting down any activity for black. And if knight takes, well, this is the game continuation, and I don't see anything for black here. Well, this is if you overplay your chances. Black seems to be unable to play anything against these strong central pawns here. But black tries to find desperately the counterplay here with pushing the kingside pawns. The queen just takes the a7 pawn. White is in no rush. And rook f8. Well, there are no hopes whatsoever for black. h4, queen a4, attacking the bishop twice. b6, and now Radjabov simply simplifies here. Makes his game very easy. You see this passed pawns here, because that pawn is hanging. Pawn takes pawn, and queen takes pawn would be the continuation. So this is why in this position, after pawn takes pawn, Ivanchuk resigned. You see, if the queen takes the pawn, and if rook g6 to try to win the queen with a discovered check, simply king takes pawn, and well, if g4, then knight e5 is crushing. This is simply crushing. So let's recap the game. And well, this could have been a King's Indian, but the Dutch-Leningrad is way more ambitious. But never overplay your ambitious plan. And you see that after knight e4, Radjabov played a very interesting opening here with pawn takes pawn. And well, if the bishop is strong on that diagonal, then it's not that easy for black. But as I said, after e5 and bishop here, rook here, You see, black has these central pawns, and white has this hanging doubled pawns, isolated pawns. So this is not a very bad position for black. This is a nice position, it's a dynamic position. e4 is a good move. Then you have to push thematically. And white is very solidly. White is active with his rooks. Black therefore has hopes with his pawn pushes. And taking here, well, is not that good of an idea in the Leningrad Dutch, in my opinion. You have to accept that there is not much, and exchanging off that strong bishop for the weak bishop is a good idea for black. So pawn takes pawn, and still bishop f8 would have been the move. And well, here you see that black's position is going downhill from move to move. I hope you liked the coverage and the analysis, and I hope you understood that the Dutch-Leningrad is an opening for a certain philosophy. You have to accept when your position is equal and just keep the position under control. And well, unfortunately it didn't work out for Ivanchuk, trying to push harder here. Please subscribe, comment, and rate the video if you liked it. See you next time.